Today, Pope Francis released an historic encyclical, a message to the world to preserve the planet from climate change and environmental degradation. In giving us his message to protect what he calls our common home, Pope Francis also has given us a common goal. We must act now to stop climate change. Pope Francis' encyclical calls all people of conscience to examine our own lives, our relationships to people and the planet, and our duty to take action. The Pope's message is clear. Mankind created the problem of climate change, and now mankind must solve it. Pope Francis delivered this message to the world, but the world needs America to lead. As the wealthiest nation in the world and one of its largest pollution emitters, it is our economic and moral responsibility to act now. There is time to avoid the worst effects of climate change, but we must act now. Global temperatures are warming, glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising, extreme downpours and weather events are increasing. The ocean is becoming more acidic. Last year was the warmest year ever recorded, and it is the poorest and the most vulnerable in developing nations who have suffered the most from the developed world's pollution. And by reducing U.S. carbon pollution, the U.S. can be a leader, not a laggard, in answering Pope Francis' call. Climate change deniers may be the doubting Thomases of the 21st century, but there is no doubting the science anymore when national academies of sciences across the globe, including the Vatican's, all agree that burning fossil fuels is changing the Earth's climate. So to all of the critics of Pope Francis' message, let's stop denying the science and let's start deploying the solutions. Let's deploy more wind and solar energy and renew tax breaks for these projects. Let's make our cars and trucks even more fuel efficient. Let's fully implement and defend President Obama's Clean Power Plan, and that will reduce carbon pollution from America's power plants. The United States can be the leader in the clean energy revolution to reduce the pollution imperiling this planet. And then we can partner with other nations to share this technology and to protect the most vulnerable. The United States has the technological imperative to lead on clean energy. We have the economic imperative to engage in massive job creation that will make it possible to save all of creation. We have the moral responsibility to protect our planet for future generations. The Pope has given us the guidance, the moral guidance in his encyclical. And we know that ultimately, science and technology will be the answer to our prayers. But the leadership must begin here. This cannot happen without leadership from the United States Senate, from the United States of America. If we want to see more solar and wind deployed in our country, then we must put the tax credits on the books that incentivize the private sector and individuals across the country to deploy it. Last year, there were 5,000 new megawatts of solar installed in the United States. That's twice as much as had been deployed in the whole history of the United States up until 5 years ago. This year, there's going to be 7,500 new megawatts of solar installed in the United States. That's triple the whole history of the United States up until 5 years ago. Next year, there is going to be 10,000 new megawatts of solar installed in the United States. That's 4 times as much as had ever been deployed in the whole history of our country cumulatively. So this is a revolution that is absolutely helping to transform the way in which we generate electricity in the United States. The same thing is true for wind. Wind is expanding at the same exact pace in terms of generating sources of electricity from a place that has always been there using God's energy in order to provide electricity for American homes and businesses. What is happening in both areas? Well, the Republican Senate has allowed the wind tax breaks to already expire. Already they have expired. The solar tax breaks expire at the end of next year. We have no agreement, no signal that this Senate is sending to the investors in solar, consumers across the country, that solar will be given any incentives past the end of next year. Similarly, we've seen a dramatic increase in the fuel economy standards of the vehicles which we drive. In fact, much of the problem that we have in finding a source of revenues for a robust transportation bill comes from the fact that people are now consuming less gasoline in their much more fuel-efficient cars. Since President Obama took the authority, by the way, which this Senate gave to him in 2007 to dramatically increase the fuel economy standards for those vehicles. We have to go all the way up to the 54.5 miles per gallon, which the president has proposed. That will dramatically reduce greenhouse gases. And we must ensure that the president's clean power rules, which he's going to promulgate within the next month, stay on the books. There are already those here in the Senate who are saying they are going to try to vitiate, to overturn, to make impossible the implementation of those power plant rules, which will keep the greenhouse gases coming out of coal-burning plants, especially across our country, to a minimum, to reduce by 30% the amount of greenhouse gases, carbon, that comes out of power plants generating electricity in our country by the year 2030. We can do this. We are a technological power. The Pope, the world, they look to us. They say to us, President Kennedy challenged the nation to put a man on the moon in 8 years in order to say to the Soviet Union that we would not allow them to dominate outer space. And in 8 years, our country invented new metals, invented new propulsion systems, returned that crew from the moon safely. And we, with our American flag, said we are going to use outer space for peaceful purposes. Well, the flag that flew on the moon is now in the Capitol. That's the return on investment in science and technology in the United States to help the rest of the world ensure that outer space will be used for peaceful purposes. Well, the rest of the world expects us to do the same thing when it comes to clean energy. The rest of the world expects us to be able to invent new technologies, new batteries, solar, wind, geothermal, energy efficiency, vehicles, metals, that will dramatically reduce the amount of pollution that we're sending up into the world, but simultaneously spread these technologies across the planet. In the 1990s, we invented new digital technologies. It was first just a very plain phone, but no one had one in their pocket until 1995 and 96 because the phone was the size of a brick and it cost 50 cents a minute. No one had one. Too expensive. But then this Congress moved over 200 megahertz of spectrum. It incentivized the private sector to begin to move. And within 3 years, everyone had one of these phones in their pockets. Well, within another 8 years, it moved to a smartphone. because we had begun the revolution. Where was the smartphone invented? Right here in the United States. Now let's take Africa for an example. 20 years ago, did anyone believe that 700 million people in Africa would have a wireless device in their pocket? No. Why do they? Because the United States invented, the United States put the policies on the books that generated this revolution. They skipped telephone poles, they went right to wireless, right to cell phone towers. We did that. We gave the leadership. Well, that's leading to a lot of economic development in Africa and in continents around this world. We have to do the same thing in energy technology. They can envision a day where they bypass having to put wires down the street for electricity as well, that solar panels could just be on their roofs, providing electricity to power their cell phones, their refrigerators, their stoves, their air conditioning. We can do this. We have the capacity to do it, but we have to set our mind to do it because there is an economic incentive for us. Oh, yes. There's a national security incentive for us. Oh, yes. We can just tell the Middle East we don't need their oil any more than we need their sand. We're going to provide our own power, and we're going to give other countries in the world the capacity to produce their own power. But we can do it as well because it's a moral imperative, because God's earth, His creation, is in fact now in jeopardy. We have to be the leaders. We have to answer this moral cause. And we can't say that we can't do it. We can't say that we can't invent our way out of this potential catastrophe for the entire planet. The Pope is calling upon us to be the world's leader, morally and economically. We can do it. And so today's an important day. I think a watershed moment. I am a Catholic. The Pope is a Jesuit who is trained as a chemist. For those who say the Pope has no business in talking about climate, he's a chemist. There are many people who say, well, I don't have a view on climate because I'm not a scientist. Well, the Pope is a scientist. He's looked at the evidence. He's asked the Vatican Academy of Arts and Sciences to study this issue. They've come back with their conclusions. Man is creating the problem, and mankind now must solve the problem. But it's to those who have created the pollution that the greatest responsibility falls. You cannot preach temperance from a bar stool. You cannot tell people to reduce what they're doing, smoking or drinking or engaging in dangerous activities, if you too are engaging in them. The leadership must come from this chamber. The leadership must come from the United States of America. Pope Francis' message must resonate throughout this chamber in the months and years ahead. If we do it, we will have been doing, as President Kennedy said in his inaugural address, truly God's work here on earth. Mr. President, I yield back to balance my time.